Well, thank you. I hate to interrupt your dessert and all of this great conversation. Um, our hope this evening was that it would be an opportunity to just come together and share an evening of fellowship and good food and connect with people who have a passion for making a difference in the world. And it feels like that is what has happened. As I was thinking about what to share at the end of this evening, a question came to mind. And the question was, do you remember my name? That was a question that was asked of me about 4 years ago by a woman in Kenya. And I have to tell you, it was a heart-stopping question. For those of you who know me, you probably know that I have a really hard time with names. And when you haven't seen someone in 2 years and they live halfway around the world, it's really hard to remember their name. Do you remember my name? Asked with a bit of hopeful expectancy, but a little bit of skepticism too. And that was a question that came to mind when I thought about talking tonight. And I was considering sharing a number of things like the incredible growth that has happened in our programs in Kenya. We started 11 years ago in one village with one women group, and now we're working in over 40 communities with women's groups in water projects. And the thing that's phenomenal is the growth has happened. The majority of that growth has happened in the last 6 years. If you look at it on a graph, it's a typical exponential curve. It's phenomenal because the women themselves are committed, and they're the ones that are actually spreading the word. And if you talk to Gracie in Kenya, she will tell you it's spreading like wildfire. So that's one of the things I was thinking about sharing with you. I guess I just did. I could also share with you the nuts and bolts of the model. There are two things that are really key. One is obviously micro savings, the savings that the women do themselves in groups. And I thought about telling you that over the last 11 years, the women in women's groups in Kenya together have saved over $400,000. Is that amazing or what? $400,000. And they do it by weaving sisal rope, harvesting sisal and processing it and making rope, and weaving baskets like the ones that you saw in the silent auction across the way. By the way, those were all hand-woven by women from our women's groups. So those of you who won those items, you got a real treasure. And they do it by, a number of them are beekeepers, and this is actually a jar of honey made by women in the Ungakomi women's group who are now beekeepers because they're part of a women's enterprises group. So that's one of the things I could have told you. I could also tell you about the financial match, our part of the model, our part that is so important that, as the ladies told you earlier, provides the incentive for these women to sacrifice and save that I can't believe that, $400,000 in an economy where most families live on $1 or $2 a day. It's just mind-boggling. And I could tell you that over the last 11 years, we have placed over 1,000 water tanks in homes in the Ukambani region of eastern Kenya. And those 1,000 tanks are probably serving easily over 7,000 people. But the thing that is really amazing, and I did the math today, that those tanks represent a savings of nearly, get this, 3 million miles walked in the last year alone. 3 million miles. You know, that would be circling the globe 117 times. And that's the amount of walking that women and children are freed up from in just this year alone. Isn't that amazing? For these families, having a water tank truly is not just a matter of freedom, but it's a matter of survival. If you've been following the situation in East Africa, the drought and the famine, that is just so severe and is impacting so many people, you'll understand how important water truly is. And I'm often asked, well, what does a water tank and a rainwater harvesting system do for a family if there's drought? Well, just because there's drought doesn't mean that there isn't necessarily rain. It means that when the rain comes, it doesn't come consistently. It doesn't come regularly enough for the crops that they've planted to grow. But the rain does come. And these families that have a water tank have the capacity to capture that God-given free gift of rain to provide for their families. And the other thing I thought about telling you was about the newest initiative of some of our women's groups. Because the drought is very real and it does impact the women that we work with, they have recognized that they aren't completely dependent on the rain because they have the storage capacity for water, whether it's rainwater or it's water from other sources. So a number of groups have come together and said, why don't we buy water? Why don't we come together and continue this process of saving that we have done for the water tanks, but do it to rent a tanker truck? They call it a Bowser. A Bowser that comes full of water and comes to the individual homes and fills the water tanks so that these families have water. And that water actually means survival for them. And I could also tell you, finally, that for these women, like the kids in the school that we talked about, they are learning that impossible is nothing. Because they will tell you that they're doing something that they never believed possible. Their husbands will tell you they're doing something that they never believed was possible. And it's changing the dynamic within those families. Those are all the facts, and those are impressive facts. But the thing that kept coming to mind for me when I was talking about what to share was the question, do you remember my name? And a woman named Alice asked me that question, and I am so relieved to be able to tell you that I did remember her name. I first met Alice and Rose and Beatrice and Sarah and Benita, women that you all have met personally, in 2005 with a Women's Enterprises work team. It was 2 years later, in 2007, when I returned with a team from the Russell Company, that I met Alice again, and she asked me that heart-stopping question. We'd been working with the women in that group for a week, but Alice had been absent. She hadn't been there. And the last day that we were in Ukambani with this women's group, Alice came because she wanted to greet us before we left. And I asked her, after she asked me, do you know my name? I asked her where she had been. And she told me that she was recovering from malaria and that she hadn't had the strength to leave her home to come work with the women's group and greet us. And she told me with a smile on her face how thankful she was to have water at her home. Because her group, the Uthukanyo women's group of Alice and Rose and Beatrice and Benita and Sarah and others, were the 6th group that we partnered with to get water, and they all had water tanks at home. And having clean water for Alice meant that she could recover from malaria with clean water, important for her health and her recovery. That she didn't have to worry about whether or not she would be able to make it to the water source in her weak condition to find and fetch and carry back the water. She knew that she could walk out her back door, turn a simple tap, and get water. And she also knew that her children could continue to go to school because she didn't need them to go get water for her while she was sick. We chatted a while, hugged, and she walked home. And that encounter with Alice has stuck with me for all of these years. Do you remember my name? I remember Alice's name. When you leave, will you? Will you remember Alice's name? And will you remember Alice and the Roses and the Beatrices and the Benitas, who all today are working and sacrificing, making a sisal rope to save so that each woman in their group can have the life-changing, precious gift of water. Alice is just one woman, but she is the face of so, so very many. Women who have come to believe that impossible is nothing. Women who have come to know you vicariously through the Organization of Women's Enterprises and have come to trust that there are people here who know them, who know their names, and who care about them and their situation. And women who know that by working together, they can change their lives and create a brighter future. And as I leave and invite Paula Rowland up, I'll just share one of my favorite quotes with you. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. It's a quote by Margaret Mead. And she says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And those women know that and believe it. Do we here believe it too? Thank you.